morning picks up the story of Jesus at his Last Supper with his disciples. We've heard a little bit about the Palm Sunday story. We've witnessed it from the children, and they talked us through it a little bit. And so now we're going to move to the second part of what this Sunday is about, and that is to experience the passion of Christ. At that Last Supper, Jesus offered the bread and the cup, and then he told his disciples that one of them would betray him. And they were shocked, and they gathered to dispute which one of them it could possibly be. And from that, an argument arose. Which of them was the greatest? It would seem that Peter was in the thick of the dispute because Jesus' next words were to him. And so let's pick up the story at that point.
Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers.
And he said to him,
Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death.
He came out, and as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them,
Pray that you may not come into the time of trial.
Then he withdrew from them, about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed.
Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done.
Then an angel from heaven appeared to him, and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the earth. Then he got up from prayer, and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them,
Oh, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial.
While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him,
Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?
When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked,
Lord, should we strike with the sword?
Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said,
No more of this.
and he touched the ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him,
Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day and day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness.
Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down, Peter sat among them. Then a servant, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said,
This man also was with him.
but he denied it, saying,
Servant, I do not know him.
A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said,
You also are one of them.
but Peter said,
Man, I am not.
Then about an hour later, still another kept insisting.
Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean.
But Peter said,
Man, I do not know what you are talking about.
At that moment, while they were still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to them.
Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times.
And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him.
Prophesy, who struck you?
They kept heaping many other insults on him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought him to their council. They said,
If you are the Messiah, tell us.
he replied,
I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God.
all of them asked.
Are you then the Son of God?
He said to them.
You say that I am.
Then they said,
What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips.
Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying,
We found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay tax to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king.
Then Pilate asked him.
Are you a king of the Jews?
He answered.
You say so.
Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds.
I find no basis for an accusation against this man.
But they were insistent and said,
He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where it began, even to this place.
When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he heard that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned him at length, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. But Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put on an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate then called them together, the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them,
You brought me this man as one who is perverting the people. And here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him.
Then they all shouted out together,
Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us!
This was a man who had been in prison for insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting.
Crucify! Crucify him!
A third time he said to them,
Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him.
But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. As they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said,
Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming, well, they will say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?
2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said,
Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.
and they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leader scoffed at him, saying,
He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one.
The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying,
If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself.
There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying,
Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us.
But the other rebuked him, saying,
Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong.
Then he said,
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
He replied,
Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise.
It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said,
Father, into your hands I commend my spirit.
Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said,
Certainly, this man was innocent.
And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things. It is a powerful story, is it not? It is a story that I'm convinced we need to hear in its fullness. And so we've heard it today. Today is March 24th. That means it's exactly 3 months past Christmas Eve, or it's 9 months until Christmas Eve. Now, how you choose to think about that probably has to do with your enthusiasm for creating gifts, buying gifts, making Christmas a really special time. I have to admit that I'm not usually in the category that starts planning Christmas at this point, or for that matter, all that early. But there was a time when I did. When I was 12 years old, my grandmother taught me how to embroider. My grandmother was a wizard at anything that had to do with a needle and thread, and she took it upon herself to teach me how to embroider. And I was getting pretty good at this cross-stitch thing. Now, not counted cross-stitch. I've never quite gotten that. We're talking about putting the needle up through one and down through the other. You got it. So one day, when I was killing some time in a store, I came across a whole display of pillowcases stamped to be cross-stitched. And I found one set that just sang out to me. It was roses. And I bought that set of pillowcases, and I determined right at that spot that I was going to sew those pillowcases for my parents for Christmas. Now, it was summer. It was late summer. So I had plenty of time. When I took them to my grandmother to show her what I had bought and to solicit her help with these, she was a little skeptical. But she was game, and we started the embroidery project. I worked a whole weekend at her house. We got quite a little bit done. And then I took them home, and I worked in my bedroom and hiding them during the day or when I wasn't working on them. And life went on. It got to be about November. And all of a sudden, I realized that I had better up my game, and I had better get going quite a bit faster, or I wasn't going to get done. And I started spending a lot more time at Grandma's house, and a lot more time in my bedroom. It was a farmhouse, and it was cold upstairs, so that meant bundling up in sweaters. At one point, my parents started worrying about what I was doing up in my bedroom so much, and I later learned that Grandma told them, "Don't worry, she's fine, just leave her be." Grandma would, when I get in a jam and couldn't figure out what to do next, or when I knew I'd messed up, I would take them to her, and she would help me sort it out and tear out what I need to start all over again. I got done the week before Christmas. This was after my grandmother also crocheted lace around the edges of them. Got them done, got them pressed, got them wrapped, and I was so excited for Christmas. It was going to be the best Christmas ever. Christmas morning came, and my parents opened up these pillowcases. Now, my dad was a farmer. And he opened up these pillowcases, and when they figured out that I had done them, that it weren't purchased, my dad got excited about them. My 6'4" father got excited, and he went and got the pillows, and they put them on the pillows, and and they put them on the bed, and they made a real big deal about it, and I was in my glory. It was a gift that I had given with my heart. It was a gift that I had poured so much of myself into. And I remember that. And I remember that as I think about the gift, the story that we've just read. Now, believe me, I'm not trying to compare a set of pillowcases with going to a cross. Don't hear that. But I am thinking about what it must be from God's perspective that he poured so much into this gift. That Christ poured so much into this gift. When Jesus came into Jerusalem that Palm Sunday that we celebrate today, he knew fully and completely what was before him. He knew that this excitement of the crowds, that these waving of palm branches, that the euphoria that was before them, that it was going to fade. There was teaching times. They cleaned the temple. He cleansed the temple. He drove out the money changers. He did this verbal cat and mouse with the temple Pharisees and those others, trying to help them get it. He did the Last Supper with his disciples. He kept saying to them, wake up, pay attention to what's going on here, because this is important. And here they are arguing about which one of them is the greatest, which one of them would not possibly betray him. And then comes arrest, betrayal. Then comes accusations and trial. Then comes Peter running away. Loneliness. Anger, despair, sorrow, hurt, fear, and pain. Surely we can't wrap our minds around that pain. Carrying his own cross, being there, humiliated, shamed, be with two criminals hanging beside him. And he constantly lifted up God's glory. Even when he's saying, Lord, if it be your will, take this cup from me. But not my will, your will be done. Even then, that's the most human response I can imagine, that first part of that. But even then, not my will, but your will be done. A gift that we can't even begin to wrap our minds around. But that's what we're called to grapple with it, to try to wrap our minds around what it is that Christ gave to us. Now, next Sunday, we're going to talk about the blessings and the joy and the benefit and all the good things that come. That's for next week. This week, we're thinking about the gift and the giving of the gift and the price of the gift and the giver. Think about God as being a 12-year-old girl for a minute, who'd worked so hard and given so much. What do we owe in response? How can we, as a people of God, receive a gift in a way that it was given? And most surely, we have to consider what was given, don't we? We have to try to open ourselves to the cost of that gift. And we have to try then to receive it. To receive the gift with gusto. What would have happened had my mom and dad said, oh, that's very nice, and then folded those pillowcases back up, put them back in the box, and put them in the cupboard? I would have been so deflated. But that's not what they did. Let's don't do that either. You know, I came to another story. And that was a gift that my grandmother gave to me. The gift of teaching me, of spending time with me, of encouraging me, of tearing out my mess and helping me get started again, of being a co-conspirator, a mediator, a cheerleader, and my biggest fan in that moment. We have a gift to give to God as well. A gift that says we receive what God has given. And then to participate with God in what God is doing in this community, in this world, in the lives of others, and yes, even in our own life. To participate and to make that gift magnified many times over. Pillowcases, life.